Simone Adair was 34 years old when a mutual friend forwarded her an engagement invitation from her ex-husband, sent as a joke. Derek was certain she wouldn't come. He'd made sure of it, telling people at the party planning stage that Simone was still finding her footing, still recovering from the divorce he'd walked away from with the company they built together and the composite process she'd invented at 26. What he didn't know was that Simone had spent 2 years quietly rebuilding, and 3 days ago she'd found the investor deck, his investor deck, built entirely around her invention, about to be sold as his own to his fiancé's father for a controlling stake, finalizing the same night as the engagement announcement. He thought the joke was that she'd never show up to watch him win. He had no idea a private jet, chartered under her own company's name, was already being arranged to land on the estate's airstrip. Derek believed the party would prove how far he'd left her behind. He had no idea it would be the last night he controlled anything at all. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The call had been running for 53 minutes. Simone Adair sat at her desk with her spine straight and her hands folded in front of her, the way she always did when she needed to look relaxed but wasn't. The speakerphone sat in the center of her desk like a small altar, and the voice coming out of it belonged to a man named Gerald Foss, VP of Acquisitions at Meridian Defense Systems, one of the 5 largest defense contractors in the country. "We've had our technical team review the composite layering process 3 times, Gerald said. "I'll be honest with you, Simone. Our people were skeptical. Materials this light with tensile strength numbers like these, they kept saying it wasn't possible." "I know," Simone said. "They said the same thing when I first filed the patent." Gerald laughed. "Well, they're not skeptical anymore." Outside her office window, the Sacramento afternoon was flat and golden. The Adair Dynamics facility wasn't big, not yet, but it was hers. All of it. The nameplate on the door, the equipment in the lab downstairs, the 12 engineers who showed up every morning because they believed in what she was building. All of it, hers. $140 million, Gerald said. "Licensing rights for the thermal composite process, 7-year term, with the performance escalator we discussed." Simone let one beat of silence pass. Not from hesitation, from discipline. "We have a deal," she said. She didn't pump her fist. She didn't stand up. She thanked Gerald, confirmed the terms with his legal team, and ended the call with the same measured tone she'd used for all 53 minutes. Then she sat very still for a moment, looking at nothing. $140 million. She'd been building toward this for 2 years. 2 years of quiet work, late nights, and carefully chosen silence. While her old social circle assumed she was still licking her wounds somewhere, still recovering from the divorce, still putting herself back together, she had been here, in this building, under this name. The divorce had cost her things that couldn't be measured in money. Derek Whitfield had been charming when she met him, charismatic in the way that certain men were, the kind that filled a room without meaning to, that made you feel chosen simply because they'd turned their attention toward you. She'd been 28. He'd been 31, and when they decided to launch a composite materials company together, it had seemed natural, a partnership in every sense of the word. What she hadn't seen, what she hadn't thought to look for, was the clause buried in the founders' agreement. 3 pages in, dense with legal language she'd trusted their shared attorney to explain fairly. Derek hadn't explained it fairly. Years later, when things fell apart, that clause became the blade he used. "Any patent work developed prior to the company's founding date shall be assigned to the controlling equity partner upon formal dissolution." She had invented the thermal composite process at 26, working alone in a university lab 2 full years before she ever met Derek. It was hers. Every formula, every test failure, every breakthrough at 2 in the morning when the rest of the building was empty. Hers. But the altered agreement made Derek the controlling partner, and so, legally, on paper, in the eyes of the arbitration process that moved faster than she could challenge it, the patent became his. She'd walked away with almost nothing. That was the version of the story her old circle knew. They didn't know about Adair Dynamics. She'd made sure of that. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at it, expecting a follow-up from Gerald's team. It wasn't Gerald. The message was from a woman named Cassandra, a mutual friend from the old crowd, the kind of person who collected gossip the way others collected shoes. Attached to the text was a photo of a cream-colored invitation, thick cardstock, gold foil lettering, the kind of thing that cost more than it needed to. Mr. Derek Whitfield and Miss Brielle Sinclair request the pleasure of your company. Below the photo, Cassandra had written, Derek says send it as a joke. He's positive you won't come, LOL. Simone read it once. Then she set the phone face down on the desk. She breathed through her nose, slow and even. The sting was real. She wasn't going to pretend it wasn't. There was something particular about being mocked by someone who had already taken so much. It wasn't grief. It was something colder than grief, something that settled into the back of her jaw and stayed there. She turned back to her computer. She needed a patent filing date for the Meridian paperwork, the original university submission from 8 years ago, the one that predated everything. She kept a copy in the old shared cloud drive she and Derek had used during the marriage, one she'd never bothered to migrate because it still held dozens of her personal research files. She logged in. The folder structure was familiar. Research archives, tax documents, early lab photos she hadn't looked at in years. She found what she needed. She copied the date into the Meridian file, and then, just before she closed the drive, something caught her eye. A folder she didn't recognize, one that hadn't been there before. Derek had clearly forgotten he'd ever shared this drive with her. The label read, Whitfield Aerostructures, Investor Deck. Simone's hand hovered over the mouse. She clicked it open. The folder held 11 slides. Simone scrolled through them slowly, the way she read anything important, without rushing, without letting her emotions get ahead of her eyes. The desk lamp was the only light in the room now. The Sacramento sky outside had gone dark while she wasn't paying attention. Slide 1 was a cover page. Clean design, expensive looking. A silver logo in the top corner. Whitfield Aerostructures. Beneath it, in crisp gray font, Series A Investment Presentation. Confidential. She scrolled to slide 2. The Opportunity. She read it. Then she read it again. The language was smooth and polished, the kind of writing that hired consultants produced. But underneath the polish, she recognized the bones of it immediately. The claims were specific, not vague marketing language, but technical specifics. Fiber orientation angles, cure cycle temperatures, resin viscosity thresholds. Numbers she had spent 18 months arriving at in a cold university lab, working with equipment that was older than she was, running the same test sequences over and over until the data finally said what she believed it would say. The deck called it Derek Whitfield's proprietary composite layup process. Her process. Her numbers. Her years. Slide 5 had a diagram, a cross-section of the layered composite structure, annotated with tolerances. Her stomach tightened. She had drawn almost this exact diagram herself in a notebook she still owned. The notebook was in a box in her storage unit, 8 miles from where she was sitting. She kept scrolling. Slide 8 was the one that stopped her entirely. Investment structure and timing. Roland Sinclair, listed by name along with his firm, Sinclair Capital, was set to take a controlling stake in Whitfield Aerostructures. The amount was substantial, and at the bottom of the slide, in a smaller font that seemed almost embarrassed by its own sentiment, the closing of this investment is planned to coincide with the engagement celebration of Derek Whitfield and Brielle Sinclair, Roland Sinclair's daughter, on the 14th, a meaningful moment for both families. 9 days from now. Simone sat back in her chair. She looked at the wall across from her for a long moment. There was a framed photo there, her and Patrice at their college graduation, both of them grinning at something happening off camera. She'd looked at it almost every day for 2 years without really seeing it. She saw it now. She picked up her phone and called Julian Cross. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was still at his desk. Julian was almost always still at his desk. I need you to look at something tonight, she said. Hello to you too, he said, but she heard the shift in his voice. He knew her well enough to hear when tonight meant right now. She sent him the folder. The line was quiet for 4 minutes. She knew because she watched the clock on her monitor. Simone, he said finally, I know. This is your process. The layup sequence, the cure cycle, this is your patent. It's not just the patent, she said. He's using it to close a controlling stake investment in 9 days. With the fiancé's father. Yes. Julian was quiet for another moment. When he spoke again, his voice was careful. This is real exposure. For Derek. Potentially criminal, depending on how the original IP transfer was documented during the divorce. He paused. But if you move on this wrong, if you call him, if you send a cease and desist right now, if you do anything that tips him off before we have the full picture, he will cover his tracks. He'll amend the deck, he'll restructure the filing, he'll put distance between himself and anything provable. I know, Simone said again. We need documented proof of provenance. Your original lab records, the university filing, timestamps. And we need proof Derek knew the IP wasn't his to use, that this wasn't some accidental overlap. It wasn't accidental. I believe you. I need paper that agrees with me. She was already thinking, not about how angry she was, though she was, not about what this meant for Meridian, for her deal, for everything she'd built. That would come later. Right now, she was thinking the way she always thought when a problem was serious enough, in sequence. What came first? What came after? What had to be in place before any of it could move? The invitation was still on her phone. Derek says send it as a joke. He's positive you won't come. He'd invited her to the party where he planned to close the deal. He'd invited her, and he was certain she wouldn't show. The idea arrived cleanly, the way the best ideas did, not as an impulse, but as a logical conclusion. The next morning, she called Patrice. I need a favor, she said when Patrice picked up. Whitfield Aerostructures. I need to know where the startup capital came from, how it moved, and whether any of it traces back to my divorce settlement. Patrice didn't ask why. She said, Give me 48 hours. 48 hours later, Patrice called her back with a tone in her voice that Simone recognized, the careful, flat tone she used when the numbers were worse than expected. Start digging, Simone told her. Document everything. That evening, she called Julian again. The party is in 9 days, she said. I'm going. A beat of silence. You're going. He invited me. I'm confirming attendance. She paused. Come with me, as my attorney. The airstrip was small, just a single paved strip cut into the hills, edged by dry grass and old oak trees. The Sinclair estate sat above it, white and sprawling against the pale, late afternoon sky, the kind of property that had been designed to make you feel small before you ever reached the front door. Simone didn't feel small. She stepped off the jet first. The air hit her warm and dry, carrying the faint sweetness of the vineyards that rolled out behind the estate in every direction. She smoothed the front of her navy blazer once, not out of nerves, just habit, and looked up at the house. Julian came down the steps behind her, sliding his sunglasses on. He had his slim leather briefcase with him. If anyone looked, they'd think it was for the party. It wasn't. Nice place, he said, completely flat. She said. A young man in a white shirt and earpiece was already walking toward them from the far end of the strip. The estate had sent a cart. Of course it had. She let him take her bag. She kept her clutch. The entrance to the main house was a wide stone terrace, strung with warm lights that would glow beautifully once the sun dropped. Caterers moved behind long tables set up along the far edge. Guests were already collecting in small clusters. Polished people, expensive clothes, the particular low hum of a crowd that believed it was exactly where it was supposed to be. Derek was standing near the entrance. He had a drink in his hand and a smile on his face, and his arm half extended toward whatever guest he'd been greeting when he heard the name. The young woman with the clipboard said it clearly. "Simone Adair, and guest." The smile didn't disappear. It did something worse. It went still. Just for a second. Just long enough. She watched him absorb it, watched the small recalibration happen behind his eyes while the rest of his face tried to hold its shape. He had told people she wouldn't come. She had heard it secondhand, through 4 different people, the way news always traveled in circles like this one. Derek says send it as a joke. He's positive she won't come. And yet... She crossed the terrace toward him and gave him a smile that was warm and entirely unreadable. "Derek," she said, "congratulations." He shook her hand. His grip was firm, deliberate. "Simone." He recovered fast. She knew he would. "I honestly didn't think you'd make the trip." "I had a client meeting nearby," she said simply. "It lined up." His eyes moved to Julian, just briefly. "Julian Cross," Julian said, extending his hand. "Good to meet you." "Cross," Derek repeated. He shook it. "How do you two know each other?" "Old friends," Simone said. She didn't elaborate. She watched Derek decide whether to push it and decide not to, and she moved past him toward the terrace. She heard Roland Sinclair before she saw him. He had a big, warm laugh, the kind that came from a person who'd spent decades in rooms where people competed to impress him and had never needed to compete himself. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 60s, silver-haired, with an easy confidence that wasn't performing itself at anyone. He turned when one of his staff murmured something near his ear. His eyes found her, and his face opened up into a genuine smile. "Miss Adair." He came toward her with his hand already extended. "Roland Sinclair. I've been told the Adair Dynamics jet just touched down on my strip. I have to say that's a first for one of Brielle's parties." "I hope that's all right," she said, warm and easy. "It's more than all right." He laughed and shook her hand with both of his. "Aerospace money coming to the valley. What's the occasion?" "A supplier meeting in Yachtville tomorrow morning," she said. Derek's invitation was well-timed. Well, Roland looked at her with the particular attention of a man who had made a lot of money by deciding quickly whether a person was real or not. "We're glad you're here. Very glad." His eyes moved briefly to Julian, just curious, not rude, and back to her. "You'll have to tell me more about Adair Dynamics. I've been meaning to follow that space more closely." "I'd like that," she said. The guests had noticed. That was the thing about an entrance like this one. You didn't have to announce it. It announced itself. Small groups had shifted. Voices had dropped into that particular register that meant, "Who is that?" She caught 2 women near the bar glancing between her and Julian and drawing the obvious wrong conclusion, and she didn't correct it. Across the terrace, Derek was talking to someone, but his eyes found her twice in the span of 3 minutes. Both times, she was already looking somewhere else. She accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and moved through the crowd at an easy pace, listening, watching, cataloging. The shape of the evening. Who stood close to Roland? Where Derek positioned himself? How Brielle moved through the room. Nervous energy under that bright smile, working hard at something. Julian appeared at her elbow a few minutes later, quiet as always. "He has no idea what just landed," he murmured. Simone let herself have the small, private smile, just for a moment. Then she stepped further into the crowd. Roland Sinclair moved through his own party the way a man moves through a room he built, unhurried, comfortable, stopping where he wanted, leaving when he chose. Simone had been watching his rhythm for 20 minutes before she drifted into his path near the far end of the terrace. It wasn't difficult. He wanted to talk to her. She could see it in the way his eyes had found her twice already across the crowd. She was the most interesting new thing in the room, and Roland Sinclair had the instincts of a man who never let interesting pass him by. "Adair Dynamics," He said it with the quiet pleasure of someone turning a word over. Composite materials, right? Defense adjacent? Defense adjacent is one way to put it, she said. We closed a licensing deal last week with a contractor I'm not able to name yet, but the application is thermal shielding for low-orbit platforms. His eyebrows moved, just slightly, the signal of a man recalibrating upward. That's not a small space to be playing in, he said. No, she agreed. It isn't. He smiled at that. She had said it without apology, and he appreciated the lack of performance. They talked for a few minutes about the materials sector, broadly, nothing proprietary, and she let him lead, asking good questions, watching him enjoy the conversation. Roland Sinclair was a man who liked smart people. He liked them even more when they didn't try too hard. Then she said, easy and curious, I heard tonight's also a business occasion for you. His chest expanded slightly. Proud. Derek didn't tell you? He mentioned an investment. He didn't say it was closing tonight. Well, Roland glanced across the terrace toward Derek, warm and proprietary. We're tying a bow on a controlling stake in Whitfield Aerostructures before the announcement. Good timing makes good press. He said it lightly, but the satisfaction underneath it was real. The composite process Derek's built is exactly the kind of foundational IP that a fund like mine is designed to protect and scale. Proprietary, documented, ready to license. She held her expression perfectly still, warm, attentive. Tonight, she said, not a question, just making sure she heard correctly. Before dinner, he smiled. Brielle thinks it's just an engagement party. Derek and I have a little surprise for her. He laughed. She'll understand when she sees the term sheet. That's a meaningful gift, Simone said. It's the right deal, Roland said simply. I back people who build real things. She found a quiet moment near the side of the terrace, alone with her sparkling water and the last of the afternoon sun going orange over the hills. She needed 60 seconds to let what Roland had just told her settle fully. Tonight, before dinner. She had been working with a timeline of days. Now she had hours. She was still working through it when she heard her name spoken gently behind her. Simone? She turned. Yvonne Whitfield was smaller than Simone remembered, or maybe she'd just aged softly, the way some women did, everything settling inward. She was dressed simply in pale gray, her silver hair neat, and she had a look on her face that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite relief, something in between. I wasn't sure you'd actually be here, Yvonne said. I almost wasn't, Simone said honestly. Yvonne touched her arm once, brief and light. Walk with me a minute? They moved away from the nearest cluster of guests, down to the stone railing at the terrace's edge, where the vineyard rolled out below them in long, even rows. He's been talking too much tonight, Yvonne said quietly. Derek, about the company, about the investment. She shook her head with the tired love of a woman who had spent decades watching her son do exactly this. He gets like that when he's proud of himself. He's built something, Simone said, keeping her voice neutral. He has. Yvonne paused. Her hands rested on the railing. I just worry about how. You know how he is. He pushes things until they fit the shape he wants. She looked out at the vineyard. After the divorce closed, I asked him point blank where the seed money came from. He said it was your buyout, the settlement. She glanced at Simone sideways. He said you'd both agreed it made more sense to put it into the company rather than... I don't know. I didn't understand the details. He said it was settled. Simone heard every word. She heard the one word Yvonne didn't know was a key. Settled. The court-ordered disbursement. The $340,000 Derek had been legally required to pay her as part of their divorce agreement. The check that had never fully arrived, explained away in pieces, delays, processing, her own lawyer telling her to give it 30 more days, then 60. He hadn't paid her. He had taken what the court ordered him to give her, rerouted it through whatever structure Patrice hadn't fully traced yet, and used it to seed a company built on a process he stole from her. Her settlement, her invention, his company. She kept her face easy. She looked out at the vineyard like she was just enjoying the view. "Thank you for saying hello, Yvonne," she said. "It means a lot." She waited until she'd rounded the corner of the terrace before she found Julian in the crowd. She touched his elbow. "It's worse than IP theft," she said quietly. "He stole my settlement, too." Julian took the information in the way he always did. Quiet, still, already sorting it into categories. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "How solid is Yvonne as a source?" "Solid enough," Simone said. "She doesn't know what she told me. She was just talking." She paused. "But Patrice needs to find that shell routing tonight." "I'll text her now." Julian was already reaching for his phone. Simone left him to it and drifted back toward the main terrace. She needed to look normal. She needed to look like a woman enjoying a party, glass in hand, nothing on her mind but the view. She managed it for about 15 minutes. Then Derek found her. He came from her left, smooth and unhurried, the way he always moved when he thought he was in control. He had a fresh drink in his hand, and the particular smile he used when he wanted something from someone he didn't respect. "Simone," he said it warmly, like they were old friends, like the invitation had been genuine all along. "Derek," she matched his warmth exactly. He positioned himself beside her at the railing, both of them looking out at the vineyard. Casual. Private. He'd chosen the spot deliberately, far enough from the nearest guest that no one could hear, close enough to the party that leaving quickly would look rude. She had to give him that. He was good at the geometry of a conversation. "I have to say," he started, easy and comfortable, "I'm genuinely glad you came. I wasn't sure." "You were sure I wouldn't," she said. Still warm, just correcting the record. A small beat. His smile didn't waver. "I heard about your deal. The licensing thing. That's impressive." "Thank you." He turned his glass slowly in his hand. She watched him decide to stop circling. "Listen," he said. "I've been thinking. With the way things are scaling for Whitfield, I'd actually love to bring you in some capacity. A consulting credit, something that acknowledges the early groundwork." He said groundwork like it was a gift, like he was being generous. "It would be appropriate, given the history." She looked at him, just looked for a moment, like she was genuinely considering it. "What would that look like exactly?" she said. "Acknowledgement on the technical record. Maybe a small retainer. Nothing too complicated. Just something that says we're honoring the work that came before." He smiled again, the smile of a man who thought he was being very clever. "It keeps things clean." She let a thoughtful pause sit between them. "I'd want to understand the scope," she said. "Which parts of the technical record specifically?" He shifted his weight, barely. "The composite layup process, the early formulation work." He waved a hand. "Your fingerprints are on the foundation. I've always said that privately." Privately. She noted that word, too. "If we're talking about proper attribution," she said, "I'd want Julian involved. He handles my IP arrangements." She tilted her head, still pleasant. "Would you be open to a call next week? The three of us, just to map out what the arrangement would actually look like?" He looked at her for a half-second too long, but the offer was exactly what he wanted. Her cooperation, her silence, a tidy box to put the whole problem in before Roland's signatures dried. "Sure," he said. "Absolutely. Next week works." "Good," she said. "I'll have Julian reach out to set it up." She watched him relax. She watched the tension he'd carried over here quietly leave his shoulders, because, in his mind, he'd just handled it. She let him have that feeling for a moment. Then she asked, conversationally, "How long have you and Brielle been together? I feel like I should know the story." He laughed, easy and unguarded now. "Little over 2.5 years." 2.5 years. Their divorce had only been finalized 22 months ago. She did the math behind a pleasant smile. "That's lovely," she said. "She seems wonderful." "She is." He swirled his drink. Then, because he was fully relaxed now and felt like he'd won something, he said, "You know, the consulting thing was actually Roland's suggestion. He wanted the technical record to be clean before the close. Due diligence thing." He shrugged. "I thought it was a good idea." She nodded slowly. "Roland's thorough." "He's cautious," Derek said, with the faint edge of a man who found caution mildly annoying. "Wanted to make sure everything traced back properly. You know how investors get." "I do," she said. He clinked his glass lightly against her water glass, a small, satisfied toast. "Good talk, Simone. Really." He meant it, or thought he did. "I think this is going to work out well for everyone." He rejoined the party the way he'd come, unhurried, comfortable, a man who had handled a problem and could now enjoy his evening. She waited until he disappeared fully into the crowd. Then she found Julian at the edge of the terrace. "He just gave us Roland as an ally," she said quietly, without knowing it. The conference room at Adair Dynamics was quiet on a Tuesday morning. No music, no extra staff, just the three of them and a long table covered in paper. Simone had booked the room under a different project name, old habit. She'd learned a long time ago that what you kept private stayed useful. What you announced too early gave the other side time to move. Patrice had arrived first, the way she always did, laptop open and 2 external drives already plugged in before Simone even had her coffee. Julian had come in behind Simone, carrying a weathered leather folder he'd had since law school. He only brought that folder when things were serious. The three of them had been at this for 6 days. Patrice pulled up the first screen without much preamble. "Okay," she said. "Here's what it is." She turned her laptop to face them. On it was a column of transaction records, clean and color-coded the way Patrice always organized her findings. Red for wrong, gray for unclear, green for confirmed. There was a lot of red. "The court ordered a settlement disbursement of $412,000 to Simone, to be paid within 60 days of the divorce decree." Patrice tapped the screen. On paper, it was paid. The disbursement record shows a transfer out of Derek's personal holding account on day 57. Looks clean, time-stamped, reference numbered, everything. She clicked to the next screen. Except the receiving account number doesn't belong to Simone. Julian leaned forward. "It belongs to a shell company called Lattice Bridge Holdings, LLC," Patrice continued. "Registered in Delaware, 6 weeks before the divorce was finalized. Single member. Guess who?" "Derek," Simone said. "Derek." Patrice said it flat and final, like a period at the end of a sentence that needed no decoration. "He moved the money out of his personal account, which made it look like the settlement left his hands, and directly into a company he controlled, which nobody was looking at. Then, Lattice Bridge made 3 capital contributions over 4 months to the seed round of Whitfield Aerostructures." The room was quiet for a moment. Simone already knew the shape of it from what Yvonne had let slip at the party, but knowing it and seeing it documented across a screen were 2 very different things. Seeing it made her jaw tighten. "He told his own mother the company was funded by my buyout," she said. "Because it was," Patrice said, "just not the way he meant it." She turned the laptop back toward herself and pulled up a second set of documents. "The falsified record is the critical piece. He didn't just skip the payment. He created paperwork to prove it happened. That's not a missed obligation. That's fraud. And since it was tied to a court order, it's contempt of the divorce decree on top of it. Julian was already writing. He worked quietly for a minute, then set his pen down and opened the weathered folder. Inside was a set of photocopied documents, the original founders' agreement from the company Simone and Derek had built together during their marriage. On top of the stack was a certified forensic analysis from a document examiner Julian had used before, a retired federal examiner named Hartwell, who didn't say things he couldn't prove. "Hartwell's report came back yesterday," Julian said. He slid it across the table to Simone. She read it slowly. She read it a second time. The examiner had found it in the signature block on page 11. The ink layering was inconsistent with the rest of the document. The font spacing around Simone's printed name had been digitally altered before the final version was printed, and the date beside her signature had been modified, moved back by 4 months, to make it appear she had signed the document before a specific clause was added, a clause that limited her equity rights and allowed a majority decision to remove a co-founder. Derek hadn't just used a loophole to push her out. He had manufactured the loophole himself. She set the report down on the table. "He forged it," she said. "Not a question. Just naming it out loud, the way you name something so it stops having power over you." "Hartwell will testify to it," Julian said. "He's testified in federal court 7 times. Opposing counsel has never shaken him once." Simone nodded once, then looked at the table. Every document was there. The investor deck from the cloud drive, the forensic trace of the shell routing, the original patent filing with her name and the date she'd been 26 years old, the altered founders' agreement, the Hartwell report, the notes from Derek's conversation on the terrace, the consulting credit offer, the agreement to a follow-up call, his own casual admission about the foundation of the process. She laid them out in a single row along the center of the table, one after another, until there was no space left between them. No gaps, no weak links, every door covered. Julian looked at the row of documents for a long moment. Then he closed his laptop. "This isn't a dispute anymore," he said. "This is a criminal exposure for him." Simone nodded. She was already thinking about timing. The call was scheduled for Thursday at 2 o'clock. Derek had suggested it himself. That was the part Simone kept coming back to. He had walked up to her on that terrace, all easy smiles and practiced calm, and handed her exactly what she needed. He didn't even know he'd done it. Julian had reviewed everything beforehand. The consent was clean. Derek had proposed the call, confirmed the time in writing over email, and framed it himself as a professional discussion about the consulting arrangement. Nothing had been hidden from him. Nothing needed to be. That was the point. Simone sat at her desk with her office door closed. Her phone was on speaker. A small digital recorder sat beside it, its red light steady. She had a single notepad in front of her. 1 pen. She didn't need much. Derek picked up on the second ring. "Simone." His voice was warm, the kind of warm that cost him nothing. "Good to actually talk. I think this could be a smart arrangement for both of us. I appreciate you following up," she said. Easy. Measured. She gave him nothing to read. "So here's what I'm thinking," Derek said. "We formalize a consulting credit on the composite process. Your name gets a mention in the technical documentation, maybe a thank you in the patent notes. Nothing that creates legal noise, just something that acknowledges you were around when the early work happened." When the early work happened. She wrote that phrase down on the notepad, word for word. "That's helpful context," she said. "Just so I'm clear, when you say the early work, you mean the foundational layup process itself? The one Whitfield Aerostructures is currently built around?" A short pause, just a half beat, barely long enough to notice. "Right. The original process, yeah," he said. "The version you were developing back then. I took it further, obviously. Scaled it, applied it to the structural side, brought in the manufacturing piece. But the consulting credit would reference the early-stage development work." "Your words," Simone said. "Sure," he said, easy again. "My words." She let him talk for another 10 minutes. He outlined the credit arrangement, mentioned a number. Small, almost insulting, but useful in its own way, and said twice that he wanted to keep things quiet and uncomplicated. He used the phrase mutual benefit 3 times. She wrote that down too. When she ended the call, she sat still for a moment. Then, she picked up her phone and texted Julian 2 words. He confirmed. Julian called back within the hour. "Walk me through it," he said. She did. She read the key phrases back to him from her notepad, then emailed him the recording file. She heard him play it twice while they stayed on the line. "That's the admission," he said, unprompted in his own words, with full consent to the call on record. "He told you the original process came from your development work. That pairs with the patent filing date, and it blows apart any argument that he independently invented anything." "So we have everything." "We have everything," Julian said. "Patent infringement, fraudulent conveyance for the shell routing, contempt for the divorce decree violation, and now a corroborating admission from Derek himself, confirming the IP originated with you." He paused. "I'll have the formal filing drafted by Friday evening." "Good," Simone said. "And Roland?" "Patrice finishes the packet tonight." Patrice had been precise about the Roland packet from the beginning. No emotional framing, no language that would feel like an accusation from a bitter ex-wife, which she knew is exactly how Derek would try to spin it if given the chance. Just clean numbers, clean documents, a clear timeline. Page 1 was the patent filing, Simone's name, the date, the technical description of the composite process, matching almost word for word the language in the Whitfield Aerostructures investor deck Derek had presented to Roland. Page 2 was the shell company trace, the disbursement record that looked legitimate, the receiving account that wasn't Simone's, the 3 capital contributions from Lattice Bridge Holdings into Whitfield Aerostructures. Page 3 was a summary. 1 page, 12 lines. It told Roland exactly what he had been told, and exactly what was true, and left the distance between those two things for him to measure himself. Patrice had attached the Hartwell report as an exhibit. She'd noted his federal testimony record in a single footnote. No editorializing, just his credentials and his finding. She sent the final version to Julian Wednesday night with a message that read, "Clean, sourced, and tight. He'll understand it on the first read." The night before the dinner, Simone sat at the long conference table alone. The documents were spread in front of her again, same order as before, same clean row down the center of the table. She read through each one slowly, not looking for gaps, there were none, but because she believed in knowing what you were carrying before you walked into a room. When she reached the last page, she closed the folder. Julian was sitting across from her, his legal pad in front of him, giving her the quiet she needed. She looked up. "Tomorrow," she said, "he finds out I never left the room." The dinner was held in the Sinclair Estate's private dining room. It was the kind of room that announced money without trying. Dark oak paneling, a table long enough to seat 16, set tonight for 8. Crystal that caught the candlelight and threw it back in pieces. Roland had chosen the room on purpose, Simone suspected. A room like this was meant to make people feel like witnesses to something important. Tonight, they would be. She and Julian arrived at 7:15, right on time, not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to seem nervous. Simone wore black, simple, fitted, nothing that asked for attention. She carried a slim leather portfolio under her arm. Derek saw her from across the room the moment she walked in. His expression moved through 3 things fast: surprise, irritation, then something that tried to settle into confidence and didn't quite make it. He crossed toward her with his hand already extended, his voice already warm. "Simone, glad you could make it." "Thank you for the invitation," she said, and shook his hand once. She meant it in a way. Roland greeted her next, genuinely pleased. He had the energy of a man about to close something he was proud of, his cheeks flushed from the wine already poured, one hand resting on the back of Brielle's chair as his daughter sat beside him. Brielle was polished and quiet. She smiled at Simone with the careful politeness of a woman who didn't quite know what to make of her, and Simone smiled back without loading it with anything. Yvonne was seated near the far end of the table. She caught Simone's eye and gave a small nod, her hands folded in her lap. She looked like someone who had been waiting a long time for a door to open and was only now starting to believe it might. The first course was served. Conversation moved the way it always did at these dinners. Easy on the surface, everyone performing a version of themselves. Roland talked about the deal with the casual pride of a man who believed he'd found something rare. Derek nodded along, adding color, his hand resting on Brielle's shoulder with the comfortable weight of a man who thought he'd already won. Julian ate quietly, watched. Simone waited. Roland set his fork down after the first course was cleared and reached for the folder in front of him, the signature pages. His attorney, seated 2 chairs down, uncapped a pen. "I think we're ready," Roland said. Simone set her hand flat on the table. "Before you sign," she said, "I'd like 5 minutes." The room shifted. Not loudly, just a degree or two, the way air changes before a storm. Roland looked at her, then at Derek, then back at her. "Of course," he said. She opened the portfolio. She didn't rush. She didn't perform. She placed the first document on the table in front of Roland and spoke clearly, the way she had presented findings in rooms full of engineers who hadn't wanted to hear her either. "This is my original patent filing on the composite layup process that Whitfield Aerostructures is built around," she said. "Filed under my name 8 years ago, 3 years before Derek and I were married. The date is here." She pointed to it. The technical description matches the process language in the investor deck Roland received, almost word for word. Roland picked it up. He read. She placed the second document beside it. "This is a forensic analysis of the founders' agreement that was used to remove me from our jointly held company during the divorce. A handwriting and document examiner confirmed the signature block was altered after the original execution. Derek did not find a legal loophole. He changed the document." The room was very quiet now. She placed the third document in front of Roland. Then she looked at him directly. "And this is the shell company disbursement trace. My court-ordered divorce settlement was never paid to me. The funds were routed through a holding company called Lattice Bridge Holdings into Whitfield Aerostructures as seed capital. The company Roland is about to invest in was built with money a judge ordered paid to me." Roland's hand had gone still on the table. Derek's chair scraped back slightly. "This is what it looks like when someone can't move on," he said. The warmth was gone from his voice now, replaced with something tighter. "Roland, I'm sorry you're sitting through this. She's had 2 years to process the divorce, and instead she's built a story around it. There is no theft here. She was a contributor early on, and the process evolved significantly after she left." Roland looked at Derek. "Simple question," he said. His voice was even, careful. "Where did the original composite process come from?" Derek leaned back. "I developed it." Julian spoke for the first time, quietly, without theater. 4 days ago, on a recorded call he consented to in writing, Derek told Simone the original process came from her development work. His words were, "The version you were developing back then." The silence that followed was complete. Brielle had gone very still. Her eyes moved from Julian to her father's face to Derek. "Brielle?" Derek turned toward her and his voice shifted again, softer now, reaching for her. "Brielle, listen. Were you with me before your divorce was finalized?" Her voice was quiet, direct. She already knew. Derek opened his mouth. She watched him try to find the version of the answer that would save him. He didn't find it fast enough. Brielle reached up slowly and slid the ring from her finger. She set it down on the table in front of him without a word, without a glance back, and walked out of the dining room. The door swung closed behind her with a soft, final click. The door had barely stopped moving when Roland set the documents down. He didn't throw them, didn't raise his voice. He simply placed them flat on the table with the careful, deliberate motion of a man who had just made a decision and was no longer uncertain about it. "Derek," he said. That was all, just the name. But the way he said it, level, stripped of every trace of the warmth from earlier, made Derek go still.
Roland, if you'll let me explain the full context. I've read the documents.
Roland glanced at his attorney, who was already capping his pen.
I'm not signing tonight.
Derek's jaw tightened.
You'd let her walk in here with a folder of paperwork she manufactured and blow up a deal we've been building for 6 months?
She didn't manufacture a patent filing date. Roland picked up the first document and held it briefly, then set it back down.
And you told her, on a call you agreed to, that the process originated with her.
I'm not arguing about that. He looked up.
What I'm interested in now is protecting my fund.
He turned to his attorney. A short, quiet exchange followed, too low for the table to fully hear. His attorney nodded and opened his briefcase. When Roland turned back, his voice was measured, professional. The warmth was gone and something colder and cleaner had taken its place.
Here's what's going to happen, he said. You're going to sign the IP rights back to Simone tonight. Full assignment, clean transfer. He paused. In exchange, I won't pursue my own fraud complaint over the false representation you made to my fund. You can't. I can.
Roland's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to.
And I will, unless you sign.
Derek signed. His hand moved across the page in the same room where he had expected to celebrate. Julian witnessed it. Simone stood still and watched without expression, the portfolio closed under her arm, her name written correctly on every line. It took 4 minutes. Yvonne had not spoken during any of it. She sat at the end of the table with her hands still folded, watching her son's face as he wrote his name away from something he had never truly owned. In the days that followed, Julian filed the contempt petition with the divorce court. The record was clean, and the trail Patrice had built was airtight. Every diverted transfer, every falsified disbursement record, the shell company that had turned Simone's settlement into Derek's seed money. The court moved quickly. Courts tended to when the paperwork was this thorough. Derek was ordered to repay the full settlement amount with penalties attached. The number was not small. He spent 3 days on the phone with attorneys, trying to find angles that weren't there. Patrice sent Simone the final order as a PDF with no message attached, just the document. Simone opened it at her desk at Adair Dynamics, read it once, and closed it. Yvonne called Derek the following Thursday. She didn't come to his apartment. She didn't write a letter. She called, the way she always had, in the early evening when she knew he'd be home. He answered on the second ring. She asked how he was. He told her the legal situation was manageable and that the press hadn't picked it up yet. He said Simone had always been calculating and that people would see through it eventually. Yvonne listened until he was finished. Then she said, simply and without anger, "Derek, I know what you did." He started to answer. She let him speak for a moment. "I don't mean the legal part," she said. "I mean what you did to her. At the beginning, when she still trusted you." The line was quiet. "I've loved you your whole life," she said. "That doesn't change. But I'm not proud of you right now, and I need you to know that." She said goodbye. She hung up. Derek sat in his apartment for a long time after that. Brielle left the estate the night of the dinner and did not return to that social circle. Not to the dinners, not to the charity events, not to the conversations that had always included Derek's name somewhere near the center. She told her father she needed distance from all of it, from the deal, from the mess, from the version of herself who had taken everything at face value. And Roland, who was carrying his own quiet shame about how thoroughly he had been fooled, did not push her. She wasn't angry at Simone. She understood, in the days after, that Simone hadn't come to hurt her. Derek had positioned her there, close enough to the fire to get burned, and had done it casually, without concern for what it would cost her. Brielle took a long look at that and kept walking.
The dining room at the Sinclair estate was empty by 9 o'clock. The crystal still caught the light. The documents were gone. The signature pages Roland had brought sat unsigned and returned to his attorney's briefcase. Derek stood alone at the table's edge, his hand resting on the back of the chair where Brielle had been sitting. The ring was still there, small and still, and catching the candlelight from the centerpiece, sitting exactly where she had left it, in the middle of everything he had built and lost in the same evening. The ribbon was yellow. Not gold, not cream, just plain yellow, the kind you'd find at any hardware store, strung between two posts at the entrance of a building that had taken 14 months and one very good contractor to finish. Simone had picked it herself. Someone on the events team had suggested silk ribbon with the company logo printed on it, and she had said, "No thank you," and ordered the plain kind instead. She wasn't interested in performance. She never had been. The crowd was maybe 200 people. Engineers, contractors, licensing partners, a handful of people from the defense contractor deal who had made the trip up from San Diego. A local city councilwoman stood near the front row, looking pleased to be photographed next to something new and real being built in her district. Simone stood at the entrance in a charcoal blazer, the morning sun flat and clean behind her. No heels, comfortable boots she'd owned for 3 years. Her hair was pulled back the way she wore it when she was working, which was most days because most days she was. Julian stood to her left, slightly behind her shoulder. He had his hands in his pockets and the expression he usually wore at events like this, present, attentive, mildly amused by everything happening around him. "You're going to have to actually speak," he said quietly. "I'm aware. Just checking. You've been staring at that ribbon for 45 seconds. I've been thinking." "I know. That's why I said something." She almost smiled. Almost. She kept the remarks short. She thanked the engineers who had worked the build-out. She thanked the city. She mentioned the licensing partnership in one sentence without naming the dollar figure, because the dollar figure wasn't the point. She said that the work had always been the point, the actual science, the material, the process that had started in a small lab when she was 26 years old and still had so much to prove. She didn't say to whom. She didn't need to. Patrice stood near the side of the crowd, a tablet in one hand and a coffee in the other, her eyes moving between Simone and what appeared to be a budget spreadsheet. She looked up long enough to meet Simone's gaze and gave a small nod. Solid, steady, the same as she had always been. Inside the building, past the glass doors and the entrance hall, the pattern wall ran the full length of the corridor leading to the main lab. 16 filings. Simone's name appeared on all of them, correct and complete, the way it had always been supposed to appear. The composite layup process was third from the left. It had its original filing date on it, the one that had always existed, that had never actually gone anywhere, that had simply been waiting to be reasserted by someone patient enough to do it right. It was just a plaque, white background, clean black text, her name in the same size as every other name on that wall. It was enough. It was more than enough. Somewhere across the city, in a smaller office than the one he'd had 2 years ago, Derek Whitfield was likely preparing a pitch for a firm whose name Simone didn't recognize when Julian had mentioned it in passing last month. Mid-sized, regional, the kind of company that hired consultants when they couldn't retain someone full-time. Julian had brought it up only once, briefly, in the context of making sure there were no lingering legal exposures. There weren't. The contempt order had been satisfied. The IP assignment was clean. Everything had been resolved in the way that things get resolved when the paperwork is airtight and the other side has no room left to argue. Simone had nodded, made a note, and moved on. She did not think about Derek often. When she did, it was without heat, the way you think about a storm that passed and caused real damage and is simply no longer overhead. That morning, before leaving for the ribbon cutting, she had found a card in her office mail, a small envelope, handwritten address, the return label from a street in Marin she recognized. Simone, I watched the announcement about the facility online. I wanted you to know I saw it, and I was glad.
I think about the years when I watched you work and didn't say the things I should have said. I'm sorry for that. I still make the lemon cake you liked. If you're ever up this way, the offer stands. Yvonne. Simone had read it twice. Then she folded it carefully along its original crease and put it in the inside pocket of her blazer, where it had been sitting all morning, pressed flat against her chest. The councilwoman handed her the scissors. Simone took them. She looked at the ribbon. Yellow, plain, exactly what she'd asked for, and then at the building behind it. Her name on the sign above the door, her process on the wall inside, her people in the crowd in front of her. She cut the ribbon. It fell away clean, both halves drifting to the ground. She handed the scissors back, turned, and walked into her own building under her own name. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day!